Assam, India, December 13, 1943, 9:27 a.m. Second Lieutenant Philip Adair was already pulling into a climbing turn when the sky came alive. Out of the pale morning haze, 64 Japanese aircraft appeared 3 miles to the east, flying in perfect formation and heading straight for Dinjan Airfield. Adair was 23 years old. He had already survived 43 combat missions with the 89th Fighter Squadron protecting the Hump airlift into China. But this morning, he was the only Allied fighter in the sky. Below him lay everything the enemy wanted to destroy. 14 C-47 transports sat on the ground, loaded with supplies for Chiang Kai-shek's armies. A field hospital treated 63 wounded soldiers. Fuel dumps held enough aviation gas to keep the Himalayan airlift alive for 11 more days. During the previous 8 weeks, similar Japanese raids had destroyed 47 Allied aircraft on the ground and killed more than 100 men. If these bombers were not stopped, Dinjan would burn. Adair's Curtiss P-40N Warhawk, Lulubelle, No. 44, carried 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, enough ammunition for 12 seconds of continuous fire. The enemy formation was terrifying. 24 Mitsubishi K-21 Sally bombers, each carrying over 2,000 pounds of bombs, were escorted by 40 Nakajima K-43 Oscar fighters, layered above and below the bomber stream like sharks protecting wounded prey. Intelligence reports said similar raids in Burma had achieved 90% accuracy on undefended fields. Adair checked his fuel. Full internal tanks, 180 gallons, 90 minutes at combat power. The Japanese formation was 3,000 feet below him, flying 240 miles per hour. Standard doctrine was simple. If you are outnumbered more than 5 to 1, wait. Philip Adair was outnumbered 64 to 1. He could shadow the raid and radio for help, but the nearest friendly fighters were 38 minutes away at Jorhat. By then, Dinjan would already be burning. Or he could attack alone. Adair shoved the throttle forward. The Allison engine howled as manifold pressure climbed to 54 inches. The P-40 surged past 300 miles per hour. 4,000 feet above the bombers, Adair positioned himself with the sun behind him. The Oscars never saw him. Their eyes were locked on the airfield ahead. Surprise was his only weapon. He picked the lead bomber group, 6 aircraft flying in 2 tight V formations, rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and dove. 360 miles per hour, 700 yards, 800. He opened fire. 6 .50 caliber machine guns erupted at once. Tracers arced into the lead Sally's left wing. Fabric shredded, metal sparked. Then the bomber's port engine exploded in orange flame. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The formation disintegrated. Bombers scattered in every direction. Adair pulled up under 7 brutal Gs as 40 Oscar fighters screamed down toward him. The Nakajima K-43 Oscar was one of the most maneuverable fighters in the Pacific. With butterfly combat flaps and a lightweight frame, it could outturn anything America flew. In the previous 6 months, Oscars had shot down 63 Allied fighters in this region alone. The P-40 was faster in a straight line, but if Adair tried to turn with them, he would die. So he never turned. He dove, fired, and extended away, over and over. Behind the fighter screen, the bombers tried desperately to reform. 3 groups of 6 aircraft began sliding back into their deadly bombing Vs. Adair had 90 seconds before they reached Dinjan. He shoved the throttle forward and dove again. 8 Oscars chased him, but at 400 miles per hour in the dive, they could not keep up. At bomber altitude, he leveled out and fired. The lead Sally's right engine detonated in a fireball. Its wingman broke violently to avoid collision. Another burst ripped through thin bomber skin. The K-21 had no armor, no self-sealing tanks. It was a flying gasoline bomb. 11 minutes at full power. Coolant temperature 230 degrees, then 240, then climbing past 250. Rounds slammed into his right wing. Green coolant sprayed across the windshield. Then the engine caught fire. Oil pressure dropped to 0. Adair leaned the mixture to starve the flames and somehow kept the Allison alive, barely. Behind him, the bombers were turning back. The raid was broken. Dinjan was safe. But now Adair was alone, wounded, on fire, and dying in the sky.
Smoke filled the cockpit. At 4,000 feet, his right aileron cable snapped. The P-40 rolled violently into a dive. No elevator control. The jungle rushed up at 200 miles per hour. At 1,800 feet, Philip Adair rolled the aircraft completely upside down. Blood rushed into his skull, vision turning red. But the damaged controls reversed. The nose came up. The impossible had worked. For a moment, Philip Adair didn't breathe. The P-40 was upside down, climbing. The engine was gone. The controls were half dead. Smoke filled the cockpit like fog. Yet somehow, the nose was rising. He rolled upright. The aircraft immediately began to fall, so he rolled inverted again, and it climbed. The broken fighter had become a paradox. To gain altitude, he had to fly upside down. For the next 11 minutes, Philip Adair fought the sky itself, rolling upright to turn, then flipping inverted just to climb, bleeding altitude every second, knowing that if he made one mistake, there would be no recovery. Below him, the green jungle waited. Above him, Japanese fighters circled, then slowly drifted away. They were out of ammunition, they were out of fuel, and none of them could believe what they were seeing. A dead American fighter climbing upside down. Through the smoke and vibration, Adair finally saw it. Naguli Airfield, 20 miles away. His hands were numb, his lungs burned. Carbon monoxide filled the cockpit. The hydraulic system was dead. He reached down and wrapped his seatbelt around the control stick, tying it in place to keep the shattered elevator from dropping. Then he grabbed the emergency hand pump. 28 strokes, each one a fight. The landing gear crept down inch by inch. 2 miles from the runway, the Allison engine quit for good. The roar vanished. The cockpit went silent. Now the P-40 was nothing more than a glider. He remembered something from training. At shallow glide speeds, an inverted aircraft traveled farther, so he rolled upside down one last time. Ground crew saw a lone fighter approaching inverted and opened fire, thinking it was a Japanese attacker. At 200 feet, Philip Adair rolled upright. The runway rushed toward him. He had no flaps, no power, no brakes, only gravity. The right landing gear collapsed on impact. The P-40 slammed into the runway, spun sideways, and tore itself apart in a storm of sparks and shredded aluminum. When it finally stopped, the cockpit was filled with smoke and flame. Adair fell out of the aircraft and into the arms of ground crew, who thought he was already dead. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 7 in the right wing. The engine completely destroyed. But not a single bomb had hit Dinjan. 3 days later, doctors still found lethal levels of carbon monoxide in his blood. On January 8, 1944, 2nd Lieutenant Philip Adair received the Silver Star. 1 pilot,
one obsolete fighter, 64 enemy aircraft, and a day the sky itself tried and failed to kill him. For several seconds, no one moved. The fighter was still burning. Men rushed in with extinguishers, tearing at twisted metal, dragging Philip Adair away from the wreck before the fuel tanks could ignite. He never felt it. He was already unconscious. When mechanics finally counted the holes, they stopped at 23. 16 bullets in the fuselage, 7 through the right wing. The Allison engine was beyond repair, warped, burned, and leaking oil from half a dozen ruptured lines. Doctors discovered that Adair had been flying with lethal levels of carbon monoxide still trapped in his bloodstream. By all medical logic, he should not have been alive. Not one bomb had fallen on Dingen Airfield. 14 C-47 transports were still intact. The health hospital still stood. The fuel dumps were untouched. The hump airlift, the only supply line into China, continued without interruption. Thousands of lives were never lost because one man refused to turn away. On January 8, 1944, Second Lieutenant Philip Adair was awarded the Silver Star. He would go on to fly 95 combat missions. He would retire years later as a colonel. But on December 13, 1943, he was not a colonel. He was not a hero. He was simply a man alone in the sky, flying a dead airplane upside down, who decided that 64 enemy aircraft were not enough to stop him. Years later, men who had stood on the tarmac at Nagali would say they never forgot the sound. Not the crash, not the gunfire, but the silence. The moment when a burning fighter slid to a stop and the war itself seemed to pause, as if the sky needed time to understand what had just happened. Because no one had ever seen a fighter climb while flying upside down. No one had ever seen a man bring home a dead airplane, and no one had ever believed that a single pilot could turn away an entire bomber raid, until Philip Adair did. There was no crowd in the sky that morning, no medals, no cameras, only a 23-year-old pilot alone over the jungle, choosing to fight when every rule said he should run. History remembers battles. It remembers victories, but sometimes history is decided by something smaller. One man, one moment, one decision not to quit. Philip Adair. Because on December 13, 1943, when 64 enemy aircraft came for Dingen Airfield, only one man was there to stop them, and that was enough.